So, good afternoon and welcome to the 23rd annual exhibit of Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies. We're always discussing innovations, technical innovations, market chances, and the potential for these technologies. And of course, the potential is not simply defined by the energy grid, a very small sector of energy in Germany by comparison with the imported oil and the imported natural gas that we use here. It's all a question of fuels, isn't it? And fuel reforming, it doesn't actually sound that romantic, but fuel reforming is an essential part of the future mix of energy. It's an exciting field where things are happening, where things are changing, and it could redefine the way we think about renewable resources, the way we think about carbon, and the way we think about how we use energy. I'm happy to have Dr. Gunther Kolb from the Fraunhofer ICT to discuss this with me. He's the most knowledgeable person in the field for fuel reforming renewable energies, and we'll be talking about hydrogen production for power-to-gas and renewable fuels. Welcome.
Hello.
So, skeptics always say, when you tell them about how beautiful a fuel cell is, a hydrogen fuel cell, they always say, so where do you get your hydrogen from? And it really is an interesting issue. Where do we get the energy from? It's no good having hydrogen if we import natural gas to create it. We'd like to be self-sufficient here in this country. We'd like to have clean, reliable, renewable resources here. And there's a number of fuel reforming technologies that help us to access fuels that exist here, fuels that are wasted, fuels that are not optimally used, and how would I say this, to change the way hydrogen is used by creating something with hydrogen that is easier to use. So these are the fuel reforming technologies that you think about. Let's talk about the renewable resources, first of all, that you use or can use and apply fuel reforming technologies to. Let's go through the list.
So there are a large variety of sources, and we have to distribute our energy supply in the future from the centralized crude oil and natural gas consumption to these new sources. Yeah, that could be carbon dioxide coming out of industrial processes, yeah, which means then decarbonizing whole industries in the future. But there are other organic and biomass sources available. Look at examples such as wood residue. There is large quantities of used cooking oil available here in Germany as well as all over Europe. So this is just to name a few examples. Yeah? Mm-hmm.
But fuel reforming allows us to do so much with these resources. To give you an example, wind and solar. Electrolysis has been around for a long time, and you're not really an electrolysis guy. But when it comes to using hydrogen and doing things with hydrogen, that's where fuel reforming technologies can play a good role. You just mentioned something, and I think the message needs to be stressed. We have pure hydrogen. Why is hydrogen sometimes difficult to use? And what are ways of optimizing the use of renewable energy that is hydrogen generated by wind and solar? What are the ways of using hydrogen beyond the classic, we have a PEM cell to put the hydrogen into, and so it's just the cycle? Splitting water and putting it back together again.
Yes, so that's a very direct approach to directly use the hydrogen generated by electrolysis. But of course, if you look at the existing natural gas grid, it is obvious that natural gas or methane is a much better energy carrier compared to the hydrogen. So converting the hydrogen using CO2, carbon dioxide, as I said, from industrial sources, and making these industrial processes CO2 neutral is really a good option. And another thing, if we look at the biomass, we can produce hydrocarbons there, which we classically can use as an energy carrier, which has a much higher power density than the hydrogen, which is even in its compressed form has a lower power density. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So you can make, for example, out of wood residue, you can produce a synthetic gasoline. And if you don't want to combust it, because combustion engines are not really what we want in the future anymore, you would do a fuel reforming. You would convert it back to hydrogen and then feed it to a fuel cell. So we would be going through a chain of catalytic processes, avoiding all the pollution issues which we have currently now so much under debate, owing to the impurities which are formed during the combustion process, the homogeneous combustion.
And there's, of course, efficiency questions as well, aren't there?
Of course, yeah. The smaller the application gets, the lower is the efficiency of the combustion engine. We know this if you look at distributed power generation, let's say, for example, for residential applications. You have something in the range of 1-2 kilowatt. You have a very low efficiency of a combustion process. Also, the utilization of the heat can be done in a better way. So you end up with maybe double the efficiency or even more than that by using fuel cells and catalytic processes.
I think there's two things that fascinate me about this description here. We have this category, decarbonization, and it's being used in several non-synonymous ways. But this is one interesting thing. If you have an industry that produces CO2, and you can't change that, you're stuck with the CO2. People will ask the question, why would you methanize hydrogen? But the key, of course, is you're only taking the CO2 that is already there and adding it. So the end effect is CO2 neutral. That's fair to say. Okay. There's also a question of quantities, though. The potential resources of renewable energy in terms of wind and solar has not been tapped yet. It's far larger. We're turning wind turbines off right now whenever the grid can't absorb that energy. And I think the more important issue is that electrical energy only represents a maximum of around 25% of the German energy budget. Is that about right?
Yeah.
And the 75% is?
Coming from fossil sources from outside of the country. Yeah?
Okay, so one, they're imports, they make us energy dependent. Two, there's a difference between fossil fuels and carbonized fuels. That is, you burn in a day the carbon that was captured over 1,000 years, potentially.
Yes.
So these are huge issues, but if 75% of our energy budget is really these imports, non-renewable resources that are damaging the environment, that are creating global warming. We have to do something about this. Why I think reformer technology is so interesting is because in this context, for the first time, I heard someone discuss decentralized fuel synthesis. Okay, I want to stress this, and I want you to explain this in detail because it's so fundamental. Everyone talks about the decentralized grid. We know that producing electrical energy locally and consuming it locally makes a grid far more efficient. But that's only 25% of the energy budget in Germany. When you talk about decentralized fuel synthesis, you're moving into the big market of oil and gas. How do you do that?
So, one example we are currently working on at Fraunhofer ICT-IMM in Mainz is to convert really wood residue to pyrolysis oil, which is an already well-established process, and then go further on to make synthetic gasoline out of that. And you have to know in Germany there are millions about 10 million tons of such wood residue still available and not used in the forest. And that could be a substantial source to produce synthetic gasoline. And that we can utilize then currently already in combustion engines and later on via the fuel processing route to make hydrogen out of that. So that would be a completely new approach compared to what we are doing now, taking crude oil and transporting it from Saudi Arabia or wherever, and making gasoline out of that in very few centralized plants, being dependent on the owners of these plants, of course. So here, the forest owner could make his own gasoline and use it or sell it. So that is really a new approach here, which will change also the economic conditions considerably.
You're talking, though, about a huge quantity of energy here. 75% of the energy consumed in Germany is consumed in the form of natural gas or oil. How far away are we from being energy self-sufficient? Of course, Germany doesn't have oil or natural gas to speak of.
Not much.
Yeah, not much. So how do we move from where we are now to energy self-sufficiency with reformer technologies and decentralized fuel synthesis? That's making, not drilling, but making, this isn't drill baby drill, that's another approach to it. This is making CO2 neutral gas and natural gas and benzene. How far away from or could we ever actually cover that demand of energy with resources within Germany using fuel?
I told you this biomass which is available can already cover a substantial part of the German gasoline demand. We can. When we use wind energy, we can make substantial amounts of natural gas, which come up to a substantial supply of natural gas, which comes up to the demand in Germany. It's just a question when we start really substantially looking into the technology, when we make resources available for that. If we wait until the gasoline price goes up again to a level which nobody can tolerate, it might be too late, because then the technology is not available when it's required. So that is the point. We cannot make the research dependent only on the current gasoline price. So if it's going up and down, we start doing research and stop it again. This is not a sustainable way of developing new technologies.
I should add, if there's any questions from the audience, you should just raise your hand and we'll attempt to address them. This is of course a new take on potentials for carbon tax. You tax the carbon if it's fossil fuel based. Are there any strategies that you could think of that would help us to make this technology more affordable, or to expedite, to speed up the energy, the process where we get to renewable energies in synthesized fuels?
Of course, subsidies and would help to direct that in the right way. If we look at what is currently done in Japan, this is really going into the right direction. We have now 190,000 fuel cell systems running in the houses, and this is only possible because there are still some subsidies for that. So they level off, but it's substantial new technology already established. And I think something similar should happen in Europe very soon. Otherwise, we might lose the
edge.
Yeah, the edge.
The advance, yeah. Yeah. And of course, there's the issue of pollution. The traffic density in Berlin correlates to the cancer incidence. It's just a classic. We have one question here.
My name is Uwe Köhler. I have a question. You made a statement that the 75% of what we use in terms of natural gas and
Fossil
fossil fuels can be replaced with material from biomass, which otherwise is wasted.
No, not exclusively. I say the biomass is one source.
Yeah.
We have one major source, which is carbon dioxide, which can be converted to natural gas. Yeah?
Carbon dioxide is not a energy source. Carbon dioxide.
But you can make out of carbon dioxide if you use renewable electricity.
Okay.
You can make hydrogen, you can take the carbon dioxide and make methane out of that.
Okay.
And the methane can replace almost every other hydrocarbon. Yeah? So that would be, of course, a major source in the future.
Yeah. Okay, but the electric energy is necessary.
The electric energy can come from, as it was mentioned before, can come from wind energy, from solar energy, which is otherwise just, they switch the windmills off because we have too much supply of electric energy. So that is the idea of power-to-gas, which
that
is
would
well
be
known.
other kind of energy storage, which replace batteries.
Chemical energy storage through either hydrogen or natural gas, yes.
Okay, thank you.
The issues get more and more complicated, and we really should continue the discussion, but we're running out of time. The booth where you can talk to Gunther Kolb is right behind me here. It's B72. It's been thrilling to have this conversation. For one thing, I'm still teasing out the implications of this one term, decentralized fuel synthesis, because this is the first time I've talked to a fuel cell or hydrogen specialist, in this case fuel reforming specialist, who's not simply talking about balancing electrical grids and dealing with that 25% of our electrical energy budget, I should say, the energy budget, but the whole 9 yards, as we say in English. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Gunther Kolb from Fraunhofer ICT. Hope to see you back here next year. Thank you. And we'll be continuing in 1 minute. Up next on stage is Dr. Graham Cooley, who's CEO of ITM Power, and they'll be discussing building a hydrogen infrastructure in the UK, a vital topic. Stay tuned. The drinks are on the house. Back in a minute.